Hi everyone, my name is Julian and I'm going to share with you about 8 dilemmas of entering the mainland Chinese market at Airbnb as a product manager. This is actually kind of a sequel to a recent presentation that I've given regarding localization at Airbnb. And so if you haven't watched that one, please be sure to check it out after this. A little bit about me. I've been working as a product manager for the past 7 years, and I have spent most of my career working as a dedicated product manager for the Chinese market. I've done so at 3 companies, including Airbnb, WeWork, and now Goat. Over the years, I've worked on quite a few products, including the China-specific versions of Airbnb's web and mobile products, WeWork's China marketing site, as well as a few WeChat mini programs. And most recently, I've also been working on Goat's WeChat mini program, customized for our mainland Chinese users. In this presentation, I'm going to be drawing examples primarily from my Airbnb experience, but a lot of the lessons and challenges were actually quite similar across the board. To give you guys a bit of a backstory, my career at Airbnb started in 2012, and I initially joined as a host manager responsible for building up quality supply in the Hong Kong and Taiwan region. Subsequently, in 2013, I was given the opportunity to work on localization for our Asian markets, which I covered in the other presentation. And then in 2014, Airbnb got increasingly interested in the mainland Chinese market, and I gradually transitioned to work more and more on the China-related tasks. Later in 2015, we have established a dedicated product and engineering team for China, and so we started focusing on developing localized features for the mainland Chinese audience. Taking a step back, however, I'm sure that some of you may have heard different stories of how foreign internet companies have tried to enter the Chinese market and all of the difficulties that they have faced. And so you may wonder why Airbnb has still decided to give it a go despite the track records of some of our peers. In an interview back in 2017, Nate, one of Airbnb's co-founders, called China the biggest travel market on the planet. He's also mentioned that China was, at that point, the fastest growing market domestically and the second fastest in terms of outbound travel. Like many other companies, Airbnb is very much attracted to the rising middle class and the 400 million millennials in China. And that's the reason why Airbnb was so interested in growing in China. As mentioned, however, entering the mainland Chinese market is hard. Because of the so-called Great Firewall, China has a completely different and independent internet ecosystem. And as a result, the user behavior and expectations are also rather different. To give you a few examples, where users spend their time on the internet is very different, how users discover and share content is different, how users sign up to apps and services is different, how users make payments and verify their identity is also very different, not to mention that there is also very fierce competition in almost every industry and sector that you can think of. And there's obviously local laws and regulations that companies will have to satisfy in order to operate in China. Essentially, a lot of the fundamental building blocks of a tech product will have to be replaced with local equivalents to even begin to function in mainland China. Now, with all of that said, however, it is not my intention for this presentation to give you a long laundry list of things to consider when it comes to entering the mainland Chinese market. Instead, I'd like to break it down by sharing 8 personal dilemmas that I have faced as a product manager during my time at Airbnb. And hopefully that would be beneficial to you regardless of whether or not you plan on expanding into the mainland Chinese market. Alright, so the first dilemma is what I call doing or understanding. Basically, the question here is how much do you need to understand a new market before committing to doing something specific for it? For us, it was a gradual process, but we have actually spent a lot of time looking into our existing user data, making field trips, and doing user research to try to better understand the mainland Chinese users and market before committing to establishing dedicated teams and offices for it. For Airbnb, we were rather lucky because we had users from China long before we were particularly interested in the market. And so one of the first things that we did was to look into the public profiles and reviews of our existing users coming from China. To our surprise, our early adopters were very descriptive and generous in their sharing, and we were able to learn a lot about them. Here's an example. Hey, I'm Zoe, aged 22, and is now a senior student majoring in business English. I like traveling, meeting different people of different countries, and getting to learn about their cultures. Airbnb is a really cool website that allows me to get in touch with local people of the destination. It is much more interesting and meaningful than staying in even 5-star hotels. And here's another example from a review. It was my first time using Airbnb, and I had to book this place because my friend's hotel nearby was fully booked. I was so glad I booked this place because it was so much bigger than my friend's hotel room. And we have found thousands more of these content pieces, and so without even proactively reaching out to our users, we were already able to distill some great insights. For example, we have found that a high percentage of our users in Asia mentioned keywords such as teacher, student, and university in their profiles, and so we know that those are likely the demographics of our early adopters. As for reviews, we have found that users usually comment on the host, the cleanliness, and the location of the listings, and so we could also assume that those are value propositions that our early adopters really cared about. Obviously, there are still limits as to how much we can learn from these more passive analyses, and so when we needed more information, we would also proactively collect data from our users through surveys and through more in-depth user interviews. During Chinese New Year of 2014, our team went to Beijing and we conducted 8 user interviews and have spoken with representatives from 10 local companies. Through it all, we've collected a lot of data and we have summarized various key takeaways. Defined our near-term and future demographics, and made proposals of what we should prioritize as immediate next steps. A lot of these suggestions and insights remain highly relevant to this day, and you can see them being reflected in the China version of the product today. Subsequently, in early 2015, our team went back to China for another round of user research, spoke with even more users this time around, and we ended up developing an entirely new travel journal feature just for the China market as a result. Just to recap, it is obviously very important and beneficial for you to better understand your potential users before making specific changes and other commitments to a new market. And there are actually many different ways to do so, and I'm sure that you can find ways that suits your needs and capabilities. All right, dilemma number 2, essential or good to have. Now the question here is, how do you prioritize product changes? How would you distinguish what's absolutely essential as opposed to something that's just good to have? Now, I remember very clearly that one of the earliest features that we did for China was to enable signing in using Weibo. Back in the day, Weibo was still very popular, and everyone was really excited about making this change. What we found, however, is that this new feature didn't really improve conversion in any way, and in retrospect, we really shouldn't have prioritized adding an alternative sign-up method because we later realized through another user research trip that this is what our front page looked like to a lot of users in Asia. Essentially, none of the photos and map were loading because these users were using older versions of Internet Explorer, and we really didn't work on supporting those browser versions because most of our users were already using Chrome globally. In Asia, however, majority of users back then were still using older Windows computers, and so it became a much bigger problem for us. As embarrassing as it is to admit, it was a very valuable lesson for us because it reminded us to get back to the basics. Before you come up with any new cool features or improvements, make sure that you're auditing all of your core functionalities regularly and that they're working properly for users in the new market. Moving on to the third dilemma, top or bottom of funnel. One thing that's particularly challenging for a market-specific product team is that our team was horizontally focused instead of vertically focused. While most product teams would already be given a rather specific product area to focus on, such as search or payments, we have both the freedom and responsibility to work on any part of the funnel, and so it was up to us to decide what to work on. Now, based on our experience, the biggest gaps and differences are usually found at the very top of the funnel and at the very bottom of the funnel. And the steps in the middle are much more universal. For Airbnb, what this means is that we would have to create very different strategies to acquire traffic, such as advertising on local search engines, producing local marketing videos, designing local marketing campaigns, and creating local tutorial content to spread awareness and educate our users. On the other hand, we also have to localize things at the bottom of the funnel, such as adding new payment methods and supporting new ID verification mechanisms. What we found is that a lot less of our users in Asia were able to go through the identity verification step, and so we had to make specific changes to help improve that situation. Now, this was just the case for Airbnb and may not be the same for you and your product, but it is very important for you to identify the biggest gaps in your funnel in order to prioritize changes. Fourthly, experiment or gut. At Airbnb, we run product like a science, and every change that we make on the site or apps are tested and backed by data. We would pretty much A/B test everything, from button colors, call to actions, to larger scale redesigns like a new navigation bar or a new landing page and so on. Back in 2017, Airbnb was already running about 700 experiments a week. To make it easy for teams to run experiments, we have built an internal tool to control them and to keep track of how each experiment is impacting a long list of metrics. When we first tried to tackle the usability issues in China, one of the big issues was that Google Maps doesn't work in China. As a short-term solution, we decided to take out the map, and immediately we saw higher engagement because at least the page is now loading for people. But deep inside, I know that not having a map is a poor user experience. Subsequently, I brought this up for weeks and months to fix this situation, but I wasn't able to convince the team that it was worthwhile to do. Eventually, one of the engineering managers proposed to run an experiment to quantify the value of having a map. Now, we couldn't run an experiment using the China market because the map is obviously not even working. What we did was we used Canada as a test market, and we removed the map for half of its traffic for a few weeks. What we found is that the group that saw no map had 10% less bookings than the regular group that saw the map. And this was when we decided that we really need to look for an alternative map provider for China. Anyway, we did end up finding a solution, and this was what our search results page looked like when you accessed it from China a few months later. Now, obviously, experimentation is a great way to stay objective when pursuing improvements, but it also has a number of limitations, especially when it comes to new market entry. The first limitation has to do with sample quality. Experiments are set up scientifically, but it assumes that the sample that you've selected for the experiment is representative of your existing and future users. Now, when you're just getting started in a new market, the demographic of your users may change drastically from week to week or month to month, and the validity of your experiment might likely expire in a rather short period of time. The second limitation has to do with sample size. When we run global experiments, it usually takes a few weeks to get statistically significant results. When we run country-specific experiments, because our sample size is a lot smaller, it may take months to get any results. Now, waiting for a few months to make a product decision really isn't practical at all. So we often have to go back and forth between making decisions that are based on more scientific and objective findings and making decisions based more on gut feelings. Take the map situation earlier as an example. Do we really need to run an experiment to tell us that having a map is important for a travel product? I don't really think so. And so my suggestion for you is to take a balanced approach. Do leverage A/B tests whenever possible and reasonable to help you make decisions, but don't get too caught up because it's really just a tool that should help you instead of slowing you down. Anyway, here are some examples of experiments that we ran, and I can quickly run you through them to give you a taste of what we did. As mentioned, we added Weibo as a new sign-up method, and the experiment was inconclusive. We have also made a couple of attempts to redesign the homepage, and both experiments were also inconclusive. Separately, we have customized the search experience to prompt users to click on different destinations to trigger a search instead of having to type it out, and that experiment was also inconclusive. We've also designed an onboarding experience for new users that visit our search results page to better educate them about Airbnb, and that was also inconclusive. Now, being inconclusive simply means that we were not able to detect any significant changes to our key metrics during the experiment, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a failure. In most cases, we actually still ended up rolling out the changes based on our intuition and the fact that at least it didn't hurt the key metrics. We did, however, had some successful experiments on the other hand, including this one where we introduced a localized predictive search experience because the one that we used globally from Google wasn't working, as well as this one that tested the impact of a much faster loading map. And this one that experimented with a new landing page for paid marketing traffic. And this one that introduced a better way for our users to share a listing on WeChat. And there's plenty more of these examples. Without a surprise, what we found to be more successful are usually experiments that are 0 to 1, or where changes are more drastic. Which brings us to the fifth dilemma, which is the question of whether to make more incremental or more drastic changes. Now, based on the principles of experimentation, we should always change as few variables as possible in order to pinpoint the reason of any detected difference. However, as previously discussed, it is particularly hard for us to do so as a new market because we have a much smaller user base and we are a lot more resource constrained. As you have seen earlier, a lot of the experiments that we ran ended up inconclusive, and they mostly involved changes that were very incremental, such as changing some of the images on the front page, or adding a banner here and there. As a result, we have started making more drastic changes subsequently, and we started seeing more positive results. Just to clarify, it doesn't necessarily mean that those more drastic changes are better ideas. But in a way, we needed more drastic changes in order to observe a difference in a shorter period of time. Now, once again, there's really no right or wrong answer here, but what's important is for you to find an approach that suits your needs and capabilities at a given time. We have tried many different approaches until we have found something that worked for us, and so it's likely that you would have to do the same. Number 6, to fork or not to fork. This one concerns whether or not to deviate from the main product and to build a new experience for a specific market. Now, it's important to note that making such a change is not a one-off decision, but a long-term commitment. Because while it may be true that whatever new feature that you're building is better than how the main product functions at this point in time, the main product is also going to improve over time, and so unless you can continue to improve this feature better and faster than what you would get undeviated or unforked, then you might as well leave it until you're ready to take it on. On a practical note, there's also a high risk when you fork a feature that it may be broken when the source code is changed. To give you an example, I have shared previously that we had to switch out the map solution in China, and what happened was that subsequently, another team has developed a new feature to outline neighborhoods and maps, and while it looked very nicely on Google Maps, it didn't on the map that we were using in China, and so this was what our map looked like for a while. I mean, this is just one of many examples, and I wanted to emphasize that it really is an important technical decision if you are considering to create a specific forked experience for a given market. Moving on to our seventh dilemma, one-time or scalable. As a market-specific product team, we often receive requests from our local marketing and business development counterparts to make changes to the product to support different local initiatives and campaigns. While supporting local initiatives is obviously one of the reasons why our team was established, we had to ask ourselves whether those requested changes are just one-time changes, or if they're scalable and can be reused for another time and scenario. Some of the changes that we were asked to do included adding a banner on the homepage to showcase the latest marketing video, creating specific landing pages for social media campaigns, adding additional communications and touch points in the product to support local partnerships, and integrating with local affiliate partners to drive user acquisition. Now, whenever possible, we would request the relevant teams to make use of existing tools that have already been built previously. For instance, we have a tool called Lando that allows anyone to create a customized landing page for partnerships. And we also have a tool that allows marketing teams to create and run different contests for users to win a stay at special locations, such as Korean megastar G-Dragon's second home, or to spend a night at the Great Wall. In some cases, if we have assessed that the requirements are overly complicated and one-off, we would respectfully ask our marketing or business development teams to source external resources to meet their needs. The key here is to have good communication with your counterparts so that they still feel supported, but at the same time understand that it's not an efficient use of resources to always make one-off changes that would soon become throwaway work. And last but not least, here comes the final dilemma, human or technology. This dilemma is probably not as obvious, but what I'm getting at is whether or not to opt for human-driven solutions or technology-driven solutions. In the last point, I was suggesting that we should try and look for scalable solutions as much as we can, but there are also exceptions of which we should be willing to do things that don't scale. You can Google it for some further reading, but doing things that don't scale is often regarded as the best advice that the Airbnb co-founders have received when they first started out. It was with this kind of mentality that they went traveling to New York to talk to hosts in person, going door to door, taking photographs of their space, and learning what they did and didn't like about the product. And because of that, Airbnb has offered free photography service to hosts for many years. And there's now an automated tool to facilitate the entire process of requesting for photos to be taken, matching photographers for a job, the uploading of the photos, and even the payment of the photographers. In terms of new market entry, a similar mentality can also be applied. For example, we are more willing to expose our customer service hotline and other entry points to receive customer inquiries because we know that our users in the new market may need help disproportionately. In another example, we were designing a new landing page that showcases guest reviews written in the local language, and in the end, we just handpicked reviews for about 40 to 50 destinations and launched it before we were able to automate the selection process. At the end of the day, my recommendation is to automate whenever possible, but even more importantly, you should prioritize the better user experience and work backwards towards a scalable solution. And with that, Those were all of the 8 dilemmas that I faced as a product manager responsible for Airbnb's initial market entry into mainland China. When looking at Airbnb's China products today, I can still see many hints of the changes and directions that we've taken that many years ago, and it's honestly a great feeling that we've certainly done something right. And so in conclusion, what is good localization? Well, in my opinion, good localization doesn't necessarily mean that you need to reinvent everything. KFC, for example, has been popular in China for the past 20-something years, and at the core, they still sell fried chicken. Although they do offer congee for breakfast in China, and they're always among the first to embrace all of the latest technologies. And they also run a lot of local marketing campaigns using local celebrities and celebrating local moments. And that is what I think we should strive for when it comes to localization. Anyway, this is all that I've prepared to share. Thank you for listening, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.